All right. Well, welcome back to this summit brought to you by the Word on Fire Institute, diving deep into what this coronavirus, this situation that we're in, means for the church, means for the practice of evangelization, means for the future of the church. And today we have a very special guest who is a Word on Fire Institute fellow, Dr. Holly Ordway, who is the Fellow of Faith and Culture at the Institute. So Dr. Holly, always great to be with you.
Well, my pleasure.
All right. Well, I thought maybe first off, just to kind of jump into it, I've had other conversations now with priests. And so between two lay people, whenever we're talking about the reality of the restrictions of the sacraments during this time, what insights might you be able to draw about what this desert moment really means to us?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question to be asking because it puts it in the right context. Because our Lord went out into the desert, right? We've just gotten through Lent. Lent is a mini desert experience. And we meditate on our Lord going out for 40 days into the wilderness. And he didn't eat and he was hungry. 40 days. That bit of he was hungry is this nice book understatement there. And so I think that one of the things really we need to think about in this experience is in what way is this truly a spiritual desert moment in the fruitful kind of way? And I've thought a lot about this in terms of modernity, because even before this crisis happened, there are a couple of things I've noticed about sort of modern culture that I think are really pertinent here. As moderns, we typically have three addictions. One of them is we're addicted to constant stimulation. We always want to be doing, we always want to be consuming. And these might even be good things in themselves, not just negative consumption, although that's certainly a factor, but good things. But there's a sort of addiction to busyness, workaholism. And I can say a mea culpa there because I struggle with that. I want to always be productive, but then I realize wait, the Lord, he calls me to be faithful. So for me, for instance, having a real Sabbath day has been just transformative, but it made me recognize this kind of addiction to constant busyness. Well, that's been taken away from a lot of us, hasn't it? No. Right? And another addiction that we have is this idea of control. We want to be in control of everything. And this taps into, I think, one of the deepest issues of American culture in particular, which is the desire for total personal autonomy. I want to be in charge. And I've argued elsewhere, and certainly when I was teaching, that this actually is at the root of the abortion debate. It's no longer really, I think, about whether the baby's alive or not. You actually find now that the more honest pro-choice people will say, yeah, it's a baby, but I think the mother should be able to choose whatever she wants to do. And I kind of applaud that honesty. It's terrible, but it's honest. But it gets into the heart of it, which is the radical autonomy that says, I get to choose everything. Now, as Catholics, we can look at that in the abortion debate and say, that's terrible. But then we have to turn to ourselves and say, well, are we so used to having control over where we go and what we do, how we live our lives? All of a sudden, that's taken away from us, and we hate it, right? So if nothing else, one thing that can come out of this spiritually is, I think, more compassion for people who are in difficult circumstances. The woman who becomes pregnant, who wasn't planning on it, who maybe was being foolish and, whatever. Okay, but she certainly wasn't expecting it, and now her whole life has changed, and it looks a lot more constricted. Yeah. Well, our lives changed overnight, and it's pretty difficult, right? Yeah. So I think if we can lean into that, live into that, I think we'll be in a place to be more compassionate as a witness to someone, to say, you know what, this is hard. You don't have control over what's happening. But, and then move forward. So it's very, in a way, difficult to be convincing when you're trying to, evangelize someone, when you're speaking from a position of being in control and they're not. Yeah. You're like, yeah, what do you know? And that really gets me to the third point, which is one that's really been on my mind about this crisis. And that is, I think that we are really addicted to choice. We want to have choices about everything. And that is related to control. But, think about it. You go shopping and there's all these choices. We're so used to that. And now, go shopping and you hope that there's some toilet paper, not necessarily your favorite brand, right? I think, for instance, it's something I've actually talked about a number of times before. I think there's a really interesting thing going on with choice and our spiritual life. And I want to look actually at the Friday penance. In America, we're allowed to choose our Friday penance, whereas traditionally it was abstinence from meat. And interestingly, England and Wales, the bishops of England and Wales have reinstated that as the penance. And I think that's prudent that they did reinstate it. And I myself keep the Friday abstinence all year, not just in Lent. And I think that this idea that we get to choose our penance actually is sort of spiritually unhelpful, specifically for us as Americans, because we're so addicted to choice. And what I found when I adopted the Friday penance all year round, and I did that actually after the example of some of my English friends, what I found difficult was actually not giving up meat and having fish. Fish is tasty. I like fish. What I found difficult was giving up the choice of what I would do, and that I realized that was the real penance for me, the limitation of choice. I can't have whatever I want. And that's been something that's really been on my heart since then, that I think as Americans, we're so used to choices that we don't know how to give that up. But that's, I think, a big thing. And I think that is a part, at any rate, of why a lot of Catholics are having such a hard time with the fact that masses are closed to the public, because they want to choose. They want to be the one to make the risk assessment. They want to be the one to make the decision. They want to be able to have what they want when they want it. Well, that's really hard not to be able to do that. It's also hard to not have access to the sacraments in person. That's totally, a real issue. But I think there's also the fact that we are so not used to having our choices limited in any way, including spiritually, that we don't have any reserves, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is really shaping part of what's going on here.
Yeah. Well, it sounds a lot like it's allowing us an opportunity to practice the virtue of obedience, right?
Yep.
and obedience to the hierarchy, obedience to our governing bodies, obedience, to even within families, obedience to each other and working with each other. And that's something that Americans just in general struggle with. I think moderns just in general struggle with it. But as you mentioned, those three aspects that are very American realities. And so it's actually, I think in a certain sense, been good for us to be kind of shocked back into realizing that our lives may not be totally about us.
Yeah. And I think, that thing about obedience, you hit in a key point. Of all the virtues, I think obedience is got to be like up there in at least the top three least favorites that people have. And I think a key here is obedience is only obedience if we are willing to obey when we don't like it. Because if I only obey when I agree, that's not obedience.
Right.
Okay. Now, again, we can say, okay, we shouldn't obey something that is immoral. Sure. If we're told to do something that's objectively wrong, no. But I think people are taking that and stretching it to be, well, in my personal judgment, I think the more prudent course would be X. Therefore, my bishop says Y. Therefore, I'm not bound to obey him. Well, you can actually go pretty deep into disagreements and have it not be a moral issue. I myself think that it was probably a good and prudent thing for the suspension of public masses. But maybe it was an overreaction. Not my job to figure that out. Thank you, Lord. But here's the thing, even if it is, that's not on us to decide. That's on the bishops and their advisors. And we do actually need to obey. And it's an opportunity to practice obedience, because honestly, if we can't obey our bishops telling us stay home so that the vulnerable won't get sick and die, how are we going to have the strength of will to be obedient when our bishops say, don't exploit the poor, don't live together without being married, that sort of, don't use contraception? We got to learn this stuff, and we don't learn it just by saying, oh, yeah, in theory I can. No, this is the testing ground, and we need to do it. We need to do it with goodwill, not grudgingly.
Yeah. And I think especially as lay people, that's part of our vocation to the bishops in general. That's just part of our relationship to the hierarchy is obedience. Now, speaking of sort of the educational and catechetical realities of what's going on, a lot of people, there's kind of several aspects to this. One is that parishes more than ever are getting into the digital world. They're literally going to the peripheries. The other aspect of it is parents are catechizing maybe for the first time in a more formal way in their homes. And so what do you kind of see as something that has happened in that reality that's maybe been good for us or challenging, but then also maybe moving forward? How has this kind of helped reorient our understanding of those aspects?
Well, I think one very good thing that has come out of this has been a breakdown of compartmentalization, because that, again, is another feature of American life. We compartmentalize. And this is so ingrained that I think a lot of Catholics do this without even realizing it. Well, Sunday Mass is my religion time, and then the rest, other. Well, no. God is Lord of every moment of your time, whether you happen to be spending it at Mass or you're at home or what have you. But I think it's been very easy to get lost because we as Americans do compartmentalize. It's kind of what we do. And the private sphere, the public sphere, religion, don't foist your religion on me, that kind of thing. It's very easy to take that in. So it's like, okay, you go to Mass, you send your kids, to, school, maybe they go to a Catholic school. So you're like, okay, that's sorted. Well, no. It's not, because you're still responsible in the family. That's the first place for catechesis. As an individual, you're still responsible for your own spiritual development, your own growth and personal holiness. Well, that's all kind of come crashing down. All the boundaries, all the compartments, that we've neatly set up. Well, I guess I got to catechize my children. I guess I need to figure out how to have a devotional life if I haven't already. And I think that's helpful. I think that's really good because we need to have an integrated life. Yeah. And I think that insofar as we begin to see, I actually can instruct my children and I can eventually send them back to be instructed by others. But it's a both and. I can, in due time go to Mass, but I can also have these devotions at home. So I see that as a real positive. It will, I think, need to be seized upon by the parishes, and that gets into the second part of your question. I think there's going to be a temptation to kind of lapse back into, okay, now we can just kind of go back to people going to Mass again. But I hope that parishes will see this moment as a time to do catechesis, to say, well, now let's help equip people. So I do think that's something that this situation has revealed, which is that we really, I was aware of it already, since this is kind of like my job to be aware of these things, but I think it's laid bare to more people that we don't typically have good catechesis. People are not being instructed in the faith. And I've certainly observed that. And I travel a lot. I go to Mass in lots of different churches, lots of different parishes. And it's really rare that I see a homily that actually is instructing, like is actually teaching the faith. It's really rare. Not that it doesn't happen, but it's a lot less common than I'd like. And there are some parishes that I've visited where there's adult Sunday school lectures and lectures and talks, things like that. Not many. Mostly it's Mass, go home. And I've been struck too, in England, it's very typical for the bulletins to include the full text of all the readings. I've never seen that in America.
Yeah.
And, or to have, it's interesting, this is something in England, the bulletins you get at Mass, they don't have advertising. And it really struck me when I came back and from one of my trips to England, I looked and said, why are there all these ads for things to buy and services in my Mass bulletin? This is sort of dissonance here. I get why they're doing it. They're donating money to the parish, but still. And yet there's no text of the gospel to take home. There's no, spiritual reading to reflect on, which is very common in English parishes. So again, we can sort of think about how are we equipping people, to expand their devotional life. So I think we need to do that. Right. So for instance, right now, people can't go to public Mass. They can't go to Mass. It's closed to the public. How many people before this pandemic had ever heard the phrase spiritual communion?
Yeah.
I'm guessing
Great
not
point.
that many. And I think a lot of people, having heard it for the first time, I think a lot of people unconsciously thought that the church just made this up last week as kind of a pat in the head of like, oh, it's okay. Rather than having it be a deep-seated part of the church tradition, deeply rooted in sacramental theology. It's a real thing. How many people actually know that, understand it? And you got to equip people with this kind of knowledge before the crisis, or else you're playing catch up. Yeah. Because if you think about it too, spiritual communion, why do we care? Well, all the people right now, we are all participating in the situation that a lot of people experience all the time. People who are chronically ill, people who are disabled and have no transportation, people in prisons, people in in nursing homes that don't have visiting masses. There are a lot of people who are experiencing as part of their regular daily life what we're all stuck with right now. Yeah. They need to make a spiritual communion because they can't go in person. Has the Lord abandoned them? No, he has not. Can we now better understand what that experience is like? Yeah, I think we can.
And I think one big part of this as well is I do think maybe we're having a moment of reflection. It's sort of forcing the issue of being able to kind of make us sit back and think about the essentials, both in parish life as well as in our own individual lives. And one thing that Americans, and I think a lot of people just in the West in general, have struggled with for a long time, is this feeling of isolation, this kind of loneliness that's out there. And now it's a forced reality where we don't get to even have that option to go one of your points as far as choice. That choice has been taken away from us. And so in a way, as you're saying, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that forced isolation versus maybe an abstract isolation. Once we get back into the world, what's that going to look like? What is this maybe teaching us a little bit about ourselves and our culture? Yeah.
And I think the forced nature of it has the potential to wake us up to the thing that we were kind of glossing over. Because American society is very atomized. We're all very disconnected. We show up to things, but how often do we have real fellowship? Mm-hmm. How often do we actually linger after Mass and talk with our friends and fellow parishioners? How often do we gather with friends and just hang out? Yeah. This is not as often as I think we should. And I think now people might be starting to realize that they always knew they could spend time with their friends, and now they're realizing that they really wish they could do that right now. So maybe it would be good to do that. Maybe there could be some changes that could happen in terms of reordering priorities. And I do think, too, that this, at a sort of more structural level, it has revealed our interdependence, societally. And, thinking now at the sort of macro level, a lot of people are now realizing, like, grocery workers, truck drivers, postal workers. These are the kinds of people that we kind of take for granted. They're just like these little cogs in the machine, so to speak. And now they're the people who are actually right there on the front lines. And golly, we're grateful that they're showing up for work and doing this work. And I think that is helping us to see a little bit more how we really do depend on each other. The mega millionaire needs to have groceries too. Not maybe that, who knows what mega millionaires do? I don't know any of them. But the lawyer down the street, he's got to go get his groceries too. And he's if they're out for him as well as for his neighbor who's, a clerk. So I think there is a sense we might be getting a little bit of kind of, we're all in this together and we do all have our parts to play. I hope. Yeah. And I do hope, from a sort of justice standpoint, I wanted to use the word social justice, but that's such a word that has gotten so much baggage, but it's also accurate. So leave off the baggage. But here's the thing, that grocery worker who's interacting with all sorts of people every day, does that worker actually have job security that he can take a day off if he's feeling sick or if his kid's sick? Or is he going to have to go into work even though he's sniffling and coughing because he's going to get fired if he takes a sick day? Is that family going to be able to go to get medical care, or is it, not available, or is it absolutely a nightmare to navigate? I mean, health insurance in America is just nightmarish. You get billed for things that you're like, where did this come from? And you spend hours on the telephone trying to argue with them over what this was. And maybe you're lucky and they say, oh, whoops, we didn't mean to bill you that $1,000. Gee, thanks. And again, that assumes the luxury of being able to understand your bill and have time to argue with them, So there's all sorts of issues there where someone might not be able to go and get health care even if they need it. And I think we've gotten, I think, a little bit sort of callous and say, oh, well, there are aid programs maybe somewhere. But what if that coughing grocery worker who had to go into work because he's going to get fired if he doesn't is the one in our local store and infects our neighbor? Yeah. We're interdependent.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to realize that. And it may cost us to do something that's more just. But this, again, kind of comes back to that desert experience. Are we willing to self-sacrifice to help our brother?
Yeah. Another part of this as well, and something we're talking about, I think, throughout the summit is the fact that the digital age has provided certain realities that would not have been able to happen in the past. One is people being able to work still, being the reality of that. The other is through spiritual communion, but still view someone saying the Mass. For example, Bishop Barron doing it and providing it to all of his viewers. But so one is that the digital age has provided something extremely positive for us. But I think the other aspect of this is also maybe a call to go back to what we might call the quote unquote real things. You and I love literature. We love the written word, but also things like nature. Just the other day I was like, man, I would love to go fishing. But I can't. I can't go to the lake right now. I would love to go fishing, but I can't. And that's something that, as we've said already, that was a choice in the past. But now that it's been taken from me, I can't go. And so I know as a expert in Tolkien and a lover of all things Tolkien, going back to nature and all of that, I do see that there's a greater appreciation of digital world, but also maybe a greater appreciation of nature.
Yeah, and I think this gets at something that's really important, both and. I don't know if your viewers will know this, but I came to the Institute from 8 years teaching online graduate apologetics work. So I have a great passion for teaching online. Built our program. I know how it can be done really well. But one thing that I always say is online has certain strengths and certain weaknesses. It's not a panacea. It can be done well. It can be done badly. So can face-to-face instruction. Face-to-face instruction has strengths, has weaknesses. So the digital environment has great strengths. I can be here in my home in Wisconsin, talking to you in the studio in Texas, and that's wonderful. And we can reach all these people who are going to be listening in their homes. That's fantastic. That's a real gift, and I'm excited to be able to use that. But it doesn't replace being able to go in person. I'm looking forward to when this is all over, God willing, and I can do lectures again, because I love being able to go to a place, give a public lecture, talk to people, have a meal with them, interact with them in person. It's both of these things are good. And I think that when it comes to the media, people have just jumped, I think, a little too quickly to an either or. Either it's terrible, it's just shallow and awful, or it's the best thing ever and we're all going to be living in this virtual world. No, thank you. I do want to go outside. So I think holding that both and in intention, I think, is really important. It's great. I mean, I've been, very grateful for Bishop Barron's masses. That's been a real spiritual, food for me during this time. And there are some other parishes that I've been doing live stream masses at. I'm really grateful for these priests and bishops who are stepping up and doing this. Does that take away the fact that I'm really looking forward to being able to receive the sacrament in person? Absolutely not. It's the both. It's the both and. And I think that can help us as evangelists as well. Use the media for what it can do well, but don't try to make it do everything. Use in person for what works well there, but realize that there are things that you can't do that way. I think that's the both and as evangelists that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well on the topic of evangelization, and after this stuff gets lifted. As of right now, a lot of evangelization has been put in the digital world because people are online now more than ever, which is a good thing. It's provided, as you said, opportunities for more catechesis, more teaching of the faith. But once maybe all this stuff is lifted, I'm trying to think about some of the things that people might be asking. And they're already asking them online, but a lot of times good evangelization requires maybe an online aspect and an in-person aspect, as you just said. And one thing that I do think is going to come up, because it is now, is this problem of evil. That what do we do with the idea of a loving God, but then all this evil in the world, especially, this is a literal global pandemic, so what do we do with that? And what advice would you have for evangelists and apologists who getting back into that realm?
Yeah, it's a great question, because really the problem of evil is the number one objection to the faith that people will raise. Not necessarily number one for any individual person, but across the board, that's typically the number one objection. And I think the first thing I would say is that we have to take it seriously. We have to say, yeah, this is a real challenge. I think sometimes when people discover that there are philosophical arguments, like for instance the free will argument, they get really excited, like, yeah, I've solved the problem of evil. I can just say free will. And yeah, that doesn't actually address what people are usually asking, which is, I'm hurting. I just lost a loved one. I don't understand what's going on in the world. Where is God in all this? I think we have to, and I think this is where the sort of imaginative development comes in. We have to kind of see what they're seeing and say, yeah. First thing I have to say is, yeah, that's hard. And then I always think that a response that we should give is to just point to the cross, and say, not that that's the only response that we can give, but I think that has to be part of our response, to say, yeah, our Lord has been through all of the suffering that we could possibly experience. He's been there, he's been through it, and through the other side. So we're not talking about a God who is sort of distant and isolated and has no idea what we're feeling. No, look at a crucifix. That hurt. back up. Look at him being abandoned by his friends. Look at him being mocked. There's every sort of humiliation and pain in that experience. No matter what we're suffering, we can find a way that our Lord has actually felt that himself in the flesh. So I think that's part of it. And then I think too that this, specifically with this coronavirus and the problem of evil, I think it has kind of brought it forward. People are sort of thinking about it more but in another way, it's not a new problem, because although in America we often act like this isn't the case, we're all going to die. We're all going to die. Every one of us, which is sort of disconcerting if you haven't thought about it before. But there's a reason why the church traditionally in Advent has us meditate on death. This is again something that's kind of gotten lost with Advent getting kind of mingled up in the pre-Christmas festivities. But traditionally, Advent is a penitential season where we meditate on death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Yeah, we're supposed to annually think about we're all going to die. So in that sense, again, if we are well catechized, we should be able to recognize that this global crisis is mortality just brought a little more face to face with us than usual.
Yeah.
But what I think we have right now is the fact that most people, even most Catholics, have kind of put it aside, have not reflected on their own mortality. And now that it's not really possible to avoid it, they're freaking out because it's a scary thing to think about your own death or the death. Or for me, I find it more troubling to think about the death of loved ones than my own death. Either way, it's scary stuff, right? And I think that part of our overall approach to evangelization is not necessarily just to tackle the problem of evil, where is God in this, but also to help people kind of come to terms with their own mortality. We are all going to die. Now, I would honestly prefer it to be quite a long time from now, and peacefully, like, please, Lord, that would be great. But, it's not up to me. And we have to trust and leave that in the Lord's hands. But that's something that when have I heard a homily about death? I can't even think of a time that I did offhand. Certainly not recently. So I think we need to be part of our response to the problem of evil, facing up to just the question of death, because that might be part of the question people are asking. Because in a way, part of what we need to do as evangelists is to help people ask better questions. Mm-hmm. Because if they're asking, where is God in all this? Why did he allow this? We need to kind of converse with them and figure out what's their question, because it might be, I'm afraid to die.
Yeah.
It might be a slightly different question. And, we have to answer the questions people actually have, not the ones that we think they have, or even the ones that they think they have sometimes. Because certainly I've been a teacher for a long time, and one of the things you learn with student questions is there's the question behind the question. There's a question a student asks, and they may not even realize what it is that they're really asking. But after you've been teaching long enough, you can usually figure it out. Like, yeah, okay, I understand why you're asking that question. Here's what you're really asking. Oh, yeah. We need to be able to do that, I think, with people's questions about evil and suffering.
And it goes right to one of your 3 points is you talk about the ultimate fear of losing control. Death is it. I mean, that
yeah.
is, one thing that people are doing right now as well is they're kind of speculating on how this is going to affect church going. As we led into this, the rise of disaffiliation just continues to move with each passing year. And so some people are saying, hey, when churches open back up, everyone's going to flood back in. Others say that, no, this is going to maybe distract people away from the sacraments. What maybe view might you offer that can be a little more balanced maybe, or what do you think we might see come out of this?
Well, Jared, I can give you a definitive I don't know.
Yeah.
And because really this is an unprecedented situation. Mm-hmm. Unprecedented for our modern time. Actually, it's quite helpful to realize that plagues are quite a common feature of the historical landscape. And I would actually recommend to viewers that they read about St. Charles Borromeo and the plagues in Milan. This actually quite similar to what is happening now. The Catholic Herald did a really great article on that just recently, including things like confession behind closed doors and public masses suspended and all sorts of things like that. Really fascinating. But that's long enough ago that it doesn't feel like our time. So we haven't had to deal with anything like this in the modern era. So it's not new for the Catholic Church, but it's new for us. And so I don't think we can really make a good prediction about what's going to happen. But that never stops me from speculating, sure. Because I think it's helpful to think about what might happen. It is possible that people might come flooding back in because they realize what they've needed. And I'm hoping that will be the response. And one thing that I hope will come out of this, really hope, will be that parishes will expand their times for confession. Because if there's one thing that I've seen is people kind of waking up to the fact that right now I can't go and get my sins forgiven. And there's one point that I think might really help people. It's that realization. Well, we were not seeing that kind of awareness before now. Because let's face it, people typically, in your typical American parish, you're not having a lot of people confessing their sins, because if you've got a half an hour on Saturday afternoon once a week, let me tell you, that's not good. That's not good enough. I have a lot of issues with that kind of limited access to confession. I think the way to go is to have it offered before or after Mass, every day if possible. So possibly a positive response to this might be people saying, you know what? It's really bad to realize that I've sinned and I can't get to confession. Maybe I should go to confession. Yes, that would be great. Because I think that regular confession is such an important piece of personal holiness. And I just applaud the parishes, of which I actually do know many, that do offer lots of opportunities for it. Such a great gift. Please let people take advantage of it. Let them press for lots more access to confession. So I think that could be a positive aspect of this. One thing that I think is a little bit less positive that we could see, I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers of people who come back are significantly lower. And in this case, though, I don't think that it would be caused by the lockdown. It would be revealed by the lockdown. Because I think in a lot of American parishes, there are so many people who are there because of inertia. Their grandparents were faithful. Their parents went because it's what you did. And they're kind of showing up because it's the thing you do. That's really tenuous. And you can't inherit the faith. You can inherit kind of habits and predispositions. But I think a lot of these people, and I know they exist because I'm involved with some of the confirmation classes here in my parish, and just seeing the lack of family sort of religious practice is kind of shocking. These are people who are just doing this. They're sending their kids for confirmation because it's what you do. And I wouldn't be surprised if, having had the thread of inertia snapped, they just don't show up anymore. But they already weren't showing up in spirit. I mean, we've seen there's the Pew survey that showed that a horrifically large number of Catholics don't believe or understand the doctrine of the real presence. Yeah. So honestly, and this is a kind of terrible thing to say, a lot of the people who are just showing up, a lot of them, if you think about it, all the people showing up, such limited confession times, human nature being what it is, I guarantee you there are lots of people receiving communion week after week in a state in which they were not objectively worthy to receive it. And we know from Scripture that that's not good for you. Now, of course, they're mostly ignorant of this because they're badly catechized. So that's a mitigating factor, but still. So we kind of have some, we have some factors here. They've been probably a lot of people receiving communion unworthily or ignorantly, and they don't even know why they're doing it. In a way, if they actually stop coming to church, we might actually be able to evangelize them properly. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if they're in church.
I think it also just adds to how a lot of parishes now, because of this, they've taken their catechesis online, they've taken their evangelization online, they've provided mass online, so that people that aren't necessarily interested in coming to any of these things, well, they're on the parish email list, and so they're getting the information, and it might be that that's the door to get them deeper interested, deeper involved. That it's kind of taking them back to step one, which is where many Catholics and Christians and people are. They need that kind of initial evangelization that maybe never happened in their life.
Yeah. And that's actually is a way that this could be really helpful for all the folks who maybe showed up, all the folks who show up on Easter and Christmas. They're stuck at home, and maybe for the first time, they're actually spiritually participating in the Mass rather than just showing up because it's what Auntie always did or what Grandma always did. So here, I think these are the kind of people who I think have been neglected in our American evangelization. They've been overlooked because they're sitting in the pew. So we assume they're okay. They're not okay. They're very, very far from okay, but we're not noticing because they're not, out there going to atheist gatherings and and saying, oh yeah, I don't believe. They're kind of like the hidden, unaffiliated, and they need to be reached out to. So maybe I think this is actually a good possibility that they might be actually able to reconnect. God can use this time of boredom and disconnection to say, oh well, maybe there's something to it. And I think it's probably helpful that the parishes that are providing the live stream masses, the recorded masses, the materials, those are, in my observation, the ones who are kind of more fired up about evangelization in general. They're not the ones that are kind of doing the, oh yeah, same old thing. They're the ones who are really motivated to get out there. And that, I think, means they're more likely to be teaching in their homilies and making it, useful for people. And so all these folks who maybe have been showing up, every month or so to Mass or, on Sundays, unless there's football, those folks might actually be making a worthy spiritual communion at home in a way that they weren't doing when they were at Mass, which is so paradoxical.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Wow. I didn't think about that aspect of it, that they're partaking in the Mass in a more sort of thorough, deep way in the comfort of their own home at this point until they can recognize that they need it physically. So that's a great point. Well, I guess, of course, you and I could just talk forever, I'm sure, because every time we connect, I just love chatting with you. But one thing I did want to maybe leave our viewers with is some really practical stuff moving forward. A lot of people are really thoroughly interested in making sure that maybe they come out of this stronger than they went in. And that means spiritually, that means mentally, etc. And so what maybe advice might you have or some book recommendations might you have as we start getting closer, hopefully, to a place where restrictions are lifted and we're back out into the real world? Because right now offers some real time to actually sit down, read a book, think deeply. So what advice and maybe book recommendations might you have?
Yeah, I think this again, I think really is the way to take this, to say, we didn't ask for this, but the Lord has seen fit to give it to us. So what use are we going to make of our time? And I do think that developing a stronger framework for personal holiness is so essential, because ultimately personal holiness is the only thing that will change the world.
That's right.
So I would say that the first thing that I would say is to develop a stronger day-to-day framework for prayer. Now, I expect that for a lot of people, they might be experiencing daily Mass for the first time. And I think that is a great blessing. And by the way, shout out to all the priests out there. Please think about doing evening Masses, because if you're a working person, a noon Mass or an 8 a.m. Mass just isn't something you can get to. But a 6 p.m. Mass, you could go on the way home from work. Just putting it out there. but I think the idea of daily mass is starting maybe to get people thinking, like, is there a daily structure rather than a weekly structure for my faith? And I think that's a huge step forward. So one thing that I would strongly recommend is people consider the practice of what's called the daily office. There's the breviary, or the forms of daily prayer, and there are different volumes that you can use. I, for instance, pray morning prayer every morning, and I use actually the customary of Our Lady of Walsingham, which is a ordinariate prayer book. But there's lots of different options that you can do, and that takes you through Scripture. It takes you through prayers. There's the collects for the day. It changes with the seasons, and it connects you with the Church's deep life of prayer and the cycle, the liturgical year, in a really rich, I think, meaningful way. And I think that is a great way to build in something that happens every day. There's this prayer. And I find that for me, the structured prayer of the daily office is really helpful, because if I just sit down to just pray, I find myself very quickly thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner, sure. Or I just wander off, or I get in the groove of the same three prayers, the same three things that are on my mind. And it's good to offer those up to God. But when you participate in the daily office, the Church's prayer, it brings you through a greater range of prayers. And it kind of went, oh yeah, I'll pray for the Pope. Right. Okay, good. I think that's a really helpful thing. It kind of broadens your spiritual vocabulary in a sense and gives you a structure. So I would recommend that. And then I would also, suggest thinking about, are there any particular devotions that you might want to try out and give a try to for a long enough stretch that it actually works. A lot of people find it helpful to pray the rosary every day. It's not something that I do. I pray the rosary probably once a week or so. I haven't found that for me personally, it's a daily devotion, but the Church in her wisdom gives us a big range of devotions. There's the Divine Mercy, and there's all sorts of devotions. So I think it's worth kind of exploring the treasure trove and saying, where is the Lord speaking to me? What devotion can I add? It might be as simple as doing a morning offering, which I do. I was starting off your day right away, offering up to the Lord. This is a good time to start instituting those sort of habits of structured prayer. And I think, getting into your point about reading, this is also a great time to say, maybe I could learn a little bit more about the faith. Yeah. And I have to say, the Catechism is surprisingly readable. Yeah. You look at that book and you think, it's scary. It's got numbered entries. It's actually really readable. And so that would be a great thing for you to pick up. Read a couple of paragraphs, every day. I always try to have some bedside spiritual reading so I can kind of wind down. How about a book of sermons? St. John Henry Newman, his sermons. Or like, I'm really fond of Ronald Knox, Knox, Monsignor Ronald Knox. His sermons are just wonderful. There's a big fat collected volume of them. And I think that can really be a good way to, just reflect on the faith through the words of these really great preachers. So that's something I would recommend. Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Holly. As always, time seems to fly whenever we're chatting. So I appreciate you joining us in this summit. And, anybody that wants to be sure to check out inside the Institute, one of our most popular courses is actually Holly's course on imaginative apologetics. And so one of the things that we have kind of touched on there with the problem of evil, if you want to get a little bit deeper into that, we do offer that inside the Institute, and I highly recommend it. So again, Holly, thank you for your time, and everybody else, I hope you appreciate today's video. Be sure to check out all the rest of the videos in the summit. We'd love to hear from you about, maybe some thoughts on what's been happening to you spiritually during this time, and maybe some thoughts on how you might want to move forward as an evangelist once these restrictions are lifted. So again, appreciate your time, and everybody have a great day, and God bless.